So good evening, Rotarians and all colleagues in peace. I'm Jim Halderman, chair of the District 5450 Peace Committee, who sponsors the forum for discussion. I'm very excited about tonight's program, as we'll be moving peace studies from theory and classroom into the field of operation. We have two presenters tonight. One is Patricia Schaefer, who is the executive director of NewsGen's Peace Builders. Patricia is also one of 1,500 Rotary Rotary Peace Fellows. And for her work in South Sudan, Patricia was nominated for a UNESCO Prize for Girls and Women's Literacy, and much more. She will be playing a key part on this. Charles Davidson, who is the director of Political Leadership Academy at Georgetown, originally scheduled to speak, had a death in the family, and has taken him away. But the Rotary presenter is Larry Cooley, who, among many other things, is a fellow at the Brookings Institution. Their full bio is on the send-out you have received weekly this past month. And Larry, the screen is yours.
Thanks so much for inviting us. And Patricia and I have talked about this a little bit. And given that you're small as a group, but large as individuals, and given that we have a lot of questions that we'd love to have answers to, our hope is to have this be as informal an exchange as we can have it be. The best way we think to do that is for us to lay out a few things for you by way of presentation, and then to leave plenty of time to talk about this, not just so you can ask questions of us, but so we can ask questions of you. Let me lay a little bit of context, and I'm going to do this a little more autobiographically than I usually would, and you'll see why in a second. My whole career has been spent working on international development. That includes a lot of issues related to governance and rule of law and resilience, but not peace explicitly. The firm that I owned and ran for many years does a lot of work in this arena, but not me personally. The thing that I did do for my whole career and still do is what some people call large change management. When governments or societies are trying to make large change happen, how do they actually manage that change process? And so, for example, for a decade, I ran a program called Implementing Policy Change that advised ministers of government on trying to make large-scale policy reforms and what it really took to make that successful and sustainable. And for the last 20 plus years, I've worked on the issue of taking successful programs to scale. I've helped a wide variety of foundations and governments and private institutions do that, everything from environmental programs to education and health programs to more recently peace programs, child protection programs, pretty much anything that somebody feels that they have operated well at a modest scale, but has aspirations to try to take to a much larger scale. So as a result of that kind of work, Rotary found me a couple of years ago and asked me to help them standing up something called Programs of Scale, which was a new initiative for Rotary, trying to figure out how you do some things at a larger scale than the typical project. And it was very interesting for me. I learned a lot in the course of doing this. My dad was a lifelong Rotarian. I was not a Rotarian then. I am now, largely as a result of that experience. And one of the things that really struck me was that having done this kind of change management for a long time, but not having had the benefit of doing any of it with or through Rotary, what an incredible structure Rotary is for certain kinds of change. If you think about it, the people in my line of work talk about social capital. And social capital, if you wanted a synonym for social capital, it would be trust. It basically means people can do things together because they trust each other to do things together. And the people who talk about this in a conceptual way talk about three kinds of social capital. They talk about bonding, bridging, and linking. Bonding is within a community, bridging is between communities, and linking is vertical, usually up and down a system. Well, try to think of a civil society organization that's apolitical and that embodies those three kinds of social capital as compellingly as Rotary. I bet you can't think of one. I can't think of one, and this is what I do for a living. So when I saw that, it's just unbelievably tempting to say what more could be done with this asset. than is already happening with it. So as a result of that work, I went down to Houston. I ran a session in Houston at the conference. And somebody I had known for really quite a long time, he'd worked for my company a few times, called me up one day. His name was David Fishman. And David was a happy warrior for peace if ever there was one. And you've probably all been touched by him at one point or another. He was incorrigible. He reached for anybody who would even countenance the thought. And I was one of the ones that he found. And he said, look, I know you do the scaling stuff. I don't know if you do it around peace issues, but I'm this enthusiastic Rotarian. He happened, and I know you just did this stuff in Houston. Could we maybe team up a little bit on this? So I said innocently, yes. And he and I were at this for a little while when he calls me late one night and he says, this is going to be a kind of a strange call, but I just found out I'm dying of pancreatic cancer. And you need to take on this project. You meaning me. And I said, David, look, it was one thing to help you with this thing, but this is your project, not mine. He said, well, it's yours now. And I mean, I have to say, I've never had anyone make a deathbed wish to me before. I don't mean to get sort of soppy about this, but it's a pretty impactful thing when that happens. And so for the first maybe 6 months I was trying to help with this, I really felt like I was carrying water for David. He died in the course of that 6-month period. Now I'm quite in love with the concept myself. And even though I have no standing in terms of what Patricia and I are going to be describing to you, I'm very committed to doing what I can to try to help it lift off. So I have no portfolio in this at all, but I've been involved from the beginning in trying to stand the thing we're going to describe up to you. So I'm going to show a couple of slides now, just by way of setting the stage for some remarks I'm hoping that, that Patricia will make about a very particular application. All right, so you've all heard, and you probably even said the statement that peace is in Rotary's DNA. I've now heard this quite a number of times, and I actually think that's right. But if you look at Rotary's programming, peace is not nearly as represented as it is in its concept, in its vision. So to me, part of the temptation, part of the thing that makes it so tempting is that it feels like Rotary is punching below its weight in this arena for a variety of reasons that some of you probably know better than I. But one of them is, I think it's not the typical kind of service project, and it looks to some people like it's political, both of which are difficult challenges to overcome, as I now understand in the Rotary context. But David's vision was that it was indeed possible to overcome this, and that there were a whole range of projects and activities that Rotary was almost uniquely situated to help with, because the trust deficit was so much a piece of what the problem revolved around, and particularly when some of these peace and conflict situations. So he networked for a long time, and he finally decided that the secret sauce for this in his mind was going to be a collaboration between Rotary and the Carter School. And so the energy was focused thereafter in trying to run that to ground. And what would that mean? And the Carter School, for those of you who don't know it, is the oldest, largest conflict resolution school in the US. It's about 40 years old. It has at any given time about 500 students at bachelor's, master's, and PhD levels. It's got a distinguished faculty. It's got students from 139 countries at any given time. It's got a couple of thousand graduates all around the world, and it's a serious place. And it has values that, to David's mind and now to mine, are very congruent with the Rotary approach to peace building. So he locked in on the Carter School and said, let's try to see where this synergy could really add value. He then went on, when he knew he was going to pass away, he was not a wealthy guy, but he and his wife, Mary Clark, gave a $250,000 bequest to try to stand this up. And that took the form of grants through the Carter School, but dedicated to the partnership. because it was not an easy way to position this within Rotary, it made more sense to put it in the Carter School, but the intention is that it's at least as much Rotary as the Carter School, probably somewhat more Rotary than the Carter School. The next step was that Al Jubitz funded 3 convenings to try to put substance into this, and David, some of his bequest was used to fund a study. The study looked at the comparative advantage of the the 2 organizations, the different models of how they might collaborate, some ideas for what activities might look like, and so on. The 3 convenings, the most recent of which just happened, where Patricia and I were both present, was to try to put flesh on those bones. That's taken the form of a concept paper that I'm going to just share conceptually with you in just a second. And the actual official launch is happening more or less as we speak. The point of view conference that just occurred was the last act before the launch. I don't know whether to say it's about to launch or just did launch, but the person who is serving as the core staff person is now in the employ of the Carter School. That's Charles Davidson, who was supposed to have been here with us tonight. So what is this collaboration supposed to be? It's got 2 principal pillars. The first is creating an incubator accelerator for projects. And the distinction, I owe this distinction to Patricia, between incubator and accelerator in this regard, is incubator would be the idea that in some cases there may be projects that are ideas, and this mechanism helps to bring them to fruition. However, the more prominent focus is on what we're calling accelerator. That's things that are already working, where proof of concept has been established, where there are Rotarians already actively engaged, but there's a possibility of taking that to a significantly larger scale and bringing in some of the analytical heft and some of the support that the Carter School represents, makes that more possible or more impactful. So that's pillar 1. Pillar 2 is integrated with that, and it has to do with education and capacity building. That's primarily for Rotarians, a la the programs you're aware of that Rotary's done for many years, but it's also through Rotary in different country settings where education in that society, and you're going to hear an example of this in a second, is itself an important peace-building intervention. So these are the 2 principal pillars: the incubator accelerator for peace projects and the education capacity building in on peace topics. There are 3 corollary, not corollary, but you might call them subordinate or ancillary parts to this concept. The 3 you see in front of you. One's research to action, which is trying to use the capacity where it's relevant of the Carter School to try to really learn from Rotary's experience, but also bring research to bear where it's relevant on some of the things Rotary wants to do. The second one is called the Better Evidence Project Hub, which already exists at the Carter School, which is a database of successful peace projects all around the world. They're going to be creating a subsection of that specifically on projects that Rotary's involved with. And the third is what's being called a Salon for Peace, which are multi-party conversations that are convened under the auspices of the Carter School, but with a wide range of participants predominated by Rotarians, and for the purpose of exploring what might otherwise be difficult to talk about or challenging to understand issues related to peace and conflict resolution. That's the basic thrust of this. There's been an active conversation about where to begin this effort, and the strongly held sentiment is it begins best around concrete activities. And so at the last point of view meeting, we showcased a couple of possibilities. One had to do with Cyprus. We're not going to talk about that tonight. One had to do with urban peace building here in the United States. We're not going to talk about that one tonight. The third one is the one we are going to talk about tonight, which has to do with Lebanon. And just before I hand it to Patricia, I'll say one last thing about it. And that is, it was chosen, or chosen is a slightly premature. I would say it's almost chosen for a variety of reasons, not least the fact that Patricia and her colleagues have been doing so much with this for so long. This is not a glimmer in someone's eye. This is something that's quite well developed. But there's a possibility using this new mechanism and bringing Rotary in an even more serious way than it's already in, that you could do something really quite important in the Lebanese context, and in the process really showcase the possibilities of this Carter Rotary partnership. At least that's our hope. Patricia, let me turn over to you.
Okay, great. Well, so first of all, I know there are a few people on the call that I know through various channels in Rotary, and so hello to you again. I will tell you a little bit in this presentation kind of about my background that leads up to the what we're talking about with the program in Lebanon, but just a little bit. Most of my attention will be on the project itself. A couple things that I love that you just did, Larry, were one, you very subtly said, you know a lot about how to scale, and you really, really do. And so I want to say to everyone who doesn't know Larry yet, Larry has been able to do in the nonprofit and humanitarian space what is often so easily done in the business space, scale, and that is hard to do. So he knows a lot about how to do that. If you haven't ever reviewed the new scale project format and application process within Rotary, and there have been 2 rounds of it, I highly recommend you do, because you'll see just the architecture of how Rotary has now thought about these this most largest of all scale opportunities, or scale funding opportunities. And Larry obviously had a big hand in that. And then Larry said, "Oh, I'm really not in this space by background. I've run a company that is in another space that you could absolutely say is related to peace building." But you did something very powerful, Larry. You said, where there is a trust deficit, projects that bond and bridge and link, build bonds and bridges and links. And so really, really, please keep those words in mind as I walk you through what the Lebanon project is, everyone. So the working title for the project, the accelerator, in the accelerator with the Rotary Carter relationship, we're calling for now Bridges to New Horizons, an integral peace leadership program for Lebanon. Now, I really would like you to hear, you could remove the word Lebanon and just say integral peace leadership program, because one of the words that the dean of the Carter School likes to use, and it's really a defining characteristic of the way we think about a program like this, is, can it be a modality? Have you structured something that could be repeated in Lebanon? It's not a once and done, but have you also structured something that could be replicated in other places? So it's not just a project, it's a methodology for doing a program. And so we have chosen the phrase integral peace leadership because you'll see that this program is really an integration of transformational leadership development and coaching, project management, peace and conflict resolution, and trauma and healing. And it's really an experiential program, a learning, coaching, development, and implementation program for, in the case of Lebanon, a group of people who the first go round will be 25 to 35 years old. They live and work in Lebanon. They are committed to being in Lebanon. They're in a variety of disciplines. So by going through this experience, which can be replicated, it's a modality, what you will see, what we're trying to express here is, how do you build a process for helping people in a place defined by long-standing and conflict and a variety of conflicts? How do you support them to be leaders at the community and municipal level to actually change the trajectory of what we know in the circumstances of Lebanon? So that is the big idea. Now let me tell you how it's going to work. So one way that it's going to work is, if you think about a peace building continuum, often we are trained to think that peace building is listening better, it's observing better, it's engaging in conversations and more productive conversations. And that is absolutely, absolutely true. But in the context of the Integral Peace Leadership Program in Lebanon, and a lot of where we can see this possibility of scale occurring, it's over in this sweet spot that is getting quite good at acknowledging gaps in the human condition, and then actually being able to go to work on it in a project that can be a program that could even be scaled. So what you'll see in this program is this is really where we're heading. Even if this is an education program, it's how do you equip the participants in the program to very artfully acknowledge gaps in the human condition and design projects and initiatives that actually have an impact, cause a difference. So it's a shift in mindset. And you will see that the thematic really is, this is an opportunity to go bigger in projects and programs than perhaps we've been able to go in peace in the past. Rotary has this beautiful 100-year history, but wow, what if, because of this beautiful relationship between Rotary and Carter, we can accelerate projects and make them even bigger than we might have imagined. Now, I want to point out that on the left side of the screen is something that some people who know me would be familiar with. This idea that Rotary has been, in my world, in my life, supporting many peace education projects around the world. And we actually celebrate what we call the Rotarian effect of training peace builders around the world by providing grants and support so that we can provide peace education tools and training to folks. But again, what if you can do this in a systematic way that can impact a country at large and be repeated in various places, and do it with adult professionals between the ages of 25 and 35. And I'll tell you in a moment why that age group really matters. So I mentioned the word modalities, this idea that you can structure things and replicate them. And some of those of you who are on the line who know me know that one of the initiatives that we were able to start in the United States is something called Youth and Peace in Action. And that was an idea started in zones 33, 34, that if you could take peace education tools and frameworks and approaches and teaching methodologies, and you structure them so they can be shared broadly, and you support them with technology, and you train others to use these tools, you can get to thousands and thousands and thousands of participants in peace education. And so we could talk about that on another day, but I think this was a beautiful illustration of trying to demonstrate that even if Rotary is focused at the community level, you can structure things so that a common experience can be available in many, many, many different communities. I think we said at the beginning of the call, or maybe before some of you came on, one of the Rotarians who is in this relationship between Carter and Rotary and this opportunity to accelerate things is past Rotary International Director for Zones 33, 34, Peter Kyle, who was one of the initiators of this idea of scalable peace education, a la Youth and Peace in Action. And so replicable modalities matter, and we have some level of track record with this. In fact, some level of track record such that these kinds of trainings, as you can see from the screen, have now been used in all these various places and locales. Again, demonstrating that it is possible in peace education and peace building education and peace building coaching and support to understand context and culture, to be cognizant of that, to appreciate that, but to use the same methodologies, to use structures that have proven themselves usable in many different contexts. Now, something that I want to say before we go on and talk a little bit more about Lebanon is, in working together on the team from Rotary and Carter, something occurred to me that in my own world, we have certified 10,000 young peace builders through using tools and frameworks like I was just making reference to. I've had the chance to speak to or run workshops with 16,850 Rotarians. And something that this caused me to reflect on is how proud we are and can be, justifiably be, within Rotary of a 100-year history of peace and peace building. But in terms of size and scope and impact, Larry used the phrase punching below our weight. What I sense a longing for is show us big, what I call big peace. Meaning, show us examples of projects where we can see Rotary is really, really a force that is making a dent. And by the way, a question you're probably going to ask in the Q&A is, wait a second, we have 1,500 Rotary Peace Fellows, and we already have Rotary Peace Centers. Why the relationship between Rotary and Carter, a school of peace and conflict resolution? So I'll be happy to answer that from my perspective, and I'm sure Larry can answer it from his. So if we Rotarians and if the world wants to be inspired by bigger examples of peace and peace building, what does that look like? How do you do it in execution? And so Lebanon is put forth as an example of how to do that. So you can see that, again, for my trajectory, it's about, 10 years ago, some Rotarians said, could we have something called New Gen Peace Builders? And we started with 3 high schools and 18 students, and now we have 10,000 peace builders at, within the 15 to 24, 29 age range, which led to this scaled initiative called Youth and Peace in Action, which led to partnerships with the Alliance for Peace Building and the Institute for Economics and Peace, which of course are both Rotary partners. And now, we're going to put some of these principles to work through this amazing platform or mechanism or relationship called Rotary and Carter. The way I think about that is Rotary has a presence around the world, is in communities, is used to incubating projects, knows how to dream up and start projects. Carter has an academic background with a practitioner's flair. They can verify the validity of projects. They can speak with credibility in the public space about the growth of projects. They can lend an air of official review and evaluation. And you put those two things together and you have something very, very special. So you put those two things together and you have something very, very special when you put projects through an accelerator. So why Lebanon? Al Jubitz has started using the phrase, because it's shovel ready. And Larry sort of made reference to that. But let's celebrate that it's part of its shovel readiness. Is a few years ago, a Rotarian who's Lebanese, who was in Tennessee, and a Rotarian who's Lebanese in Lebanon, said, we really don't have anything in Lebanon that looks like organized, disciplined peace education training and mentoring. Why can't we do that? And so a $90,000 global grant was put forward to incubate an experience in Lebanon, to see what the impact is and what was and could be, to see how it might be built on in the future. And so students from 11 different universities across Lebanon were recruited and selected into a program that was 6 intensive days over 3 months, intensive coaching and support for the creation of peace projects. And one of the things that happened out of the creation of the peace projects was a project that was actually picked up by the World Food Program to be incubated further. It was a food insecurity project. There was a project that took university students and community members to the Green Line, a really important point in terms of the past civil war in Lebanon, for the first dialogue at that specific point on the Green Line that crossed religion, sect, politics, age, to talk about our mutual history of being Lebanese. So very interesting projects emerged. We actually have somebody right now who came out of that program who's being considered for a Rotary Peace Fellowship right now. And so we've had several successes like that. But I want you to look on the right and see, sometimes when you say Lebanon, people say, oh, well, of course you would want to do peace building there. But being purists, being objective, there's all kinds of data we put on the right of the screen that demonstrates the challenges and the fragility of Lebanon, compounded by the fact in the past few years, there was an enormous explosion in the port of Beirut. The Lebanese lira has taken a nosedive. Banks are challenged. The educational system, which the Lebanese are very, very, very proud of and should be, has been hit hard. Let's see. Just in the last year, 2.47% of the Lebanese population has left the country. The previous year was 1.9%, etc. So here's a very fragile system. Okay. And so we say, well, all right, so how can we take what we did just a couple of years ago and build on it? That's the question. Everybody looked at each other and said, what now? The challenge is that, in the current structure that we have, it's a little difficult to continue projects funded by Rotary, and we wanted to move fast. Real quick point here, one of the groundings of why Lebanon for an accelerator project that we reference is a study that was done over 3 years by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And what they basically said kind of relates back to what Larry was saying about a trust deficit. They said there's a trust deficit. So we need to invest more in human capital to develop more stakeholders in the region, and so read Lebanon also, who can be influencers in the transformation of their society. We need to develop new kinds of accountability that can help transform the future in this region, which they said has limited experience with dispute resolution techniques. We need, capacity building at the local level to create new institutions. And right now, Lebanon is very challenged in healthcare, education, food distribution, and so on. And we need new incentives. We need to incent increasingly younger people to be motivated by the possibility of innovating and being entrepreneurial in initiatives to build this new future. Okay, so you can see the case for education and training in some way, and focusing on a particular age group. So Larry said we've been working on this for a while. So for over the course of a year, we've been trying to answer the question, what next? Based on this backgrounding I'm giving you. So a team that consists of content experts in those 4 areas that I mentioned, trauma and healing, transformational leadership, peace and conflict resolution, and project management, doing things at the municipal level, has been working with input from Carter in the arena of neighborhood and community transformation and development. How to actually give the program some academic credibility, which will be very important to the participants, and really how to think about critically a peace modality. And then we've been working with Rotarians as well as young Rotarians who are either Rotary Peace Fellows or young Rotarians getting their degrees in peace and conflict and international diplomacy and so on, as a reality check on how do we effectively do this program. All right, and so that team has been working with Rotary input, Carter input, the team of experts that we had put together who are already content specialists in these arenas, these integral arenas, and voila, I'm going to show you something that may scare you. Here you go. So shovel ready. There is a program that has been, designed, which would officially kick off in June 2024. Should we all ensure for ourselves that we have sufficient funding to do this? But it will actually be introduced in Lebanon in January to get stakeholder feedback, to get feedback from Rotarians, to get feedback from the Malcolm Kerr Center for Peace Building, which is in Beirut, to get feedback from leaders at the municipal level. So you can think of it as starting conversations in January, really kicking off in June. It has multiple workshops and coaching experiences around producing quality projects, and in theory be complete by the end of next year. So that is the journey. I won't go into all the details of theories and pedagogies and frameworks. I just wanted you to know it was solid, because when you can fill a screen, it must be solid. And so that is really, in a nutshell, what the Lebanon Project is. But I want to close with this phrase. We say it's a call to action for Lebanon. And the call to action for Lebanon, given the circumstances we've described, is how do we energize and equip networks of young bridge builders to lead peace-infused transformational projects across geographic, religious, ethnic, economic, and political identities? So imagine the mix of participants that we're going to have. Increasing social cohesion, Larry might say trust and social capital for more resilient and prosperous communities. And that means ultimately, if you repeat this enough, a country. Notice that is the Lebanese flag. We've taken out the word Lebanon because the idea is it could be repeated in other places once we get enough learnings and track record to do so. And I think that's the overview of the project. I hope I haven't taken too long, Larry.
That was great. I'll just say 2 quick things by way of clarification, then we'll open it up for questions or comments or anything people would like to talk about. The first is to say that by illustrating with a project, we wanted to try to make this as real for you as we could. The danger in doing that is that you'll think that it's always going to be this kind of a project. If you'd heard what was being discussed for Cyprus and what was discussed for urban peace building, they were quite different than this. So the imagination is that this would be a vehicle for doing a range of things, some of which have been thought of and some of which have not yet been thought of. The second thing I would say, and Patricia said this, but I just want to underline it, is that the concept is that this is not primarily applying for Rotary funding. It's not to say it would preclude Rotary funding, but that's not the intention. This is not another way to position things for global grants. The idea is that this would try to set up a mechanism that could appeal to and attract resources from a variety of sources. For example, if the Lebanon one goes ahead, there's a decent chance that some of us will go up to New York to try to pitch it to the Rockefeller brothers, just as an example. But you can imagine a range of different funders for different projects, depending on the nature of the undertaking. It's our belief that, so far not tested, that not only does the Rotary network constitute an important asset in terms of the implementation of these programs, but it includes a large number of people that can be extremely valuable in helping to resource some of these things from a variety of sources. That, again, is part of the premise, but not yet part of the evidence on this. So we've had this conversation very explicitly with the Carter School in terms of trying to judge the depth of their commitment to help stand behind proposals, to be the vehicle for collecting resources and channeling them to these projects, unless or until the projects have some other mechanism for that. They seem to be remarkably flexible for an academic institution in the approach they've taken toward this. They do not apply large overheads or anything else to this. They're obviously looking for places they can add substantive value, but that's not a precondition on their part. So we're looking at a range of potential projects that build to the extent possible on the synergy between these two institutions and takes advantage of the somewhat unique possibilities that is occasioned by bringing them together. At that, let us end and open it up to any questions or comments people might have.
All I can say is, wow, I just can't believe that you're undertaking such a noble and expansive project. God bless you. I've been privy to David Fishman. He was a dear friend, and he was on our Rotary Action Group for Peace board. And I had the privilege of talking to him on my peacepodcast.org. And he was so passionate about this combination. He wanted the Carter School and Rotary to be the bridge to bring peace to our planet. And I was so grateful when you brought him into the conversation today. And so, as you have been implementing David's death wish, as you called it, what have you found really works?
In terms of the project, or in terms of attracting attention to the possibilities?
I think both.
Let me talk about the second one first, because I think it's a little bit of a challenge, and that's why I'm, in some sense, treating you all more as a focus group than as an audience on this. Because I think trying to figure out how to do this to best advantage on the Rotary side is more complicated than I would have imagined. The Carter School side is constituted as an entity for this purpose. But if you say this is a collaboration between Rotary and the Carter School, the Rotary side is very, very complicated. I'm an organization guy, and I can tell you with absolutely no fear of contradiction, this is a very complicated proposition on the Rotary side, because you could take it all the way up and say, okay, it's an initiative of Rotary International and it's managed out of Evanston, but that's not the spirit of this. You know, the spirit of this is that it would be endorsed by, and there seems to be a fairly high probability of an MOU now between Rotary and the Carter School for this purpose. But that should not, and I don't think it's intended to be, the Rotary International taking over the effort. Think of it as kind of a member-led effort that they're supporting and encouraging, but exactly how, to me, still needs more thinking. The reason we picked the projects we have is because they've somehow traversed part of that ground already. They found a way to involve Rotary and Rotarians, but I think that's a work in progress. And people just like you, I'm not saying this to flatter you, people just like you are whose thinking we need on that part of the conversation. So I would say, having now been at 3 of these 2-day events, convened at the Point of View Conference Center at the Carter School, that the enthusiasm of those who've touched it is very, very high. But both the knowledge gap and maybe the enthusiasm gap remains large on this thing. So I think there's no shortage of projects, initiatives, both on the educational side and on the kind of, you can call it service side, that really meet the criteria. But trying to figure out how to the Rotary side of that comes together remains, to me, a bit of a question. I'll just say one more thing, and I see Tom's hands up. And that is, we've had this conversation with Rebecca Kroll, and she has an interesting concept that I think may have pertinence for this. She's been trying to promote, and to some extent has promoted, the idea of regional networks of Rotarians, particularly around peace building. There are 3 or 4 of them. There's one in East Africa, one in West Africa, and then there are a couple more. And her notion is that since these activities, these peace problems, and therefore the peace interventions, tend to span geographies, you need some way for the Rotary side to think and act that spans geographies. And one possibility is to try to use these regional networks somewhat energized to do that. That's not a very good answer to your question, Barbara. You can tell we're still struggling with this.
Well, I understand that, because we also have that issue to really get Rotary to move the needle a little, just a little, so we can get in there and do the work we know needs to be done. Thank you so much for both of you for being there. And Aljubit sings your praises as I do.
Thank you. Tom?
Tom, you have a question?
Thank you. And first, a comment, just really appreciating the thoroughness and the detail with passion that both of you have expressed, very, very deep. And the one of all you said, the one thing I want to respond to is Carter School question, can it be a modality?
Yeah.
And what I'm sharing is with you is it sounds like you went in there listening to what were the needs of theirs also, not just, hey, here's something we like to do. So I want to salute you for that.
Well, thank you for saying that. And I think that's true, because the notion that these 2 entities really each gain from the association,
yep,
I think is central to it being successful at all. So it would not work if Carter School were simply looking for a Rotary imprimatur. They're not. It would not work if they just wanted a few Rotarians to work on projects. They're not. So the driving concept on this is that there are things that Rotarians are doing where the Carter School engagement can really add value, and in the process enrich the Carter School offering.
Thank you.
And the reason I think that's attractive to them, I'm not quite them, but in the course of this, to try to understand them better, I accepted an offer to go on their board. So I'm now on the Carter School's board, largely to help shepherd this project. But what I can tell you from having seen it from that point of view is they really pride themselves on being exactly in that praxis place where theory and practice come together. But they don't have as many opportunities to do that as they wish they did.
Yes.
I don't know if they would say it that way, but I would say it that way. And this potentially gives them an outlet, both for their faculty and for their students, where it adds value to really engage with genuine, on-the-ground, operational peace building activities.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Larry,
let me ask my question real quick.
Sure.
I'd like to follow up with you if I can. That's my ask, if you're willing to do that. My offering, and some of you know me and Patricia does, I've been doing service learning for 30 years. And you think about Rotary, service above self, and service learning is a modality around the world. I live 5 minutes from the National Middle School Association's national offices, and I've been over there. And the Carter Center, I got introduced to nonviolent communication at the Carter Peace Center. And just for the fun of it, the international conference in 2017 was a peace pre-conference, and former President Tanaka gave one of the generations of the trees from Hiroshima to the Carter Center.
Oh, cool.
That's the beauty of the connection and the spirit behind all this.
Now, I need to make one clarification, though, that because in fact, it could have been either way. It's not the Carter Center in Atlanta. Yes. It's the Carter school named after Carter at George Mason that's the partner in this case.
Okay, thank you. Got it.
Yeah.
But what you
So,
said,
Larry-
what you said is no less relevant.
Yes, thank you.
Larry, we have a question from Quanta Don.
Would you mind, before we take the next question from Quanta, what I'd like to do is close out on something that Tom asked about and Larry partially answered. I'd like to give one more point about the value of this relationship. So believe it, I know we all say, oh, well, what are the parallels between polio and whatever we can do in the future? You know, what does that look like in the peace context? And one of the things I see is the story of polio is really one Rotarian proposing an idea which began to grow. They got additional funding inside Rotary, but over the course of the 30 years the program has been underway, polio and the eradication of polio has been pursued not by Rotary singularly, it's by Rotary in partnership with the United Nations and the Gates Foundation and so I see the same potential parallels here because the power of Rotary and that Carter School Association means a different way of speaking to other potential partners and funders to grow something to be truly, truly, truly large in scale. So I think that's a parallel. So I want to make sure we said that.
Thank you.
Quanta?
Well, I have posed this question at another group and I wanted to share it again. Actually, I'm pretty much going to read what I have written. There are apparently close to 1,500 world peace organizations alone out of the 1.4 million organizations that are focused on international efforts. Of course, Rotary is most likely one of them in this statistics. So they have 3 billion in revenue each year and 7 billion assets. So what I was thinking is that with all this effort from the United States alone, how is it that we are not really being effective as a nation, as a people, to build world peace in the world? So I just wanted to also mention that sometimes power and dollar seem to be the focus, you know, I'm not saying just in Rotary, but because these organizations are competing for dollar and they want it to be visible and always excessively maybe emphasize their success. So these are the pitfalls. So I'm wondering how Rotary really evaluates programs, whether it's a relationship with other organizations or within itself in terms of outcome of their efforts. Thank you. I made a very long question. I'm sorry. Thank you.
No, it's an important question, you know, and I have no authority to answer this, but I'll give you my particular point of view about this. I think this would not be worth the trouble if I didn't think Rotary had a pretty unique footprint. If this were just one more peace building organization, I don't honestly think the world needs one more. It needs more. I would basically take the premise of your question, which is that there are 1,500 of them or however many there are already. What do you need one more for? But for the reasons I said before, I honestly don't think anyone that I've come across represents the kind of social capital that basically is credible at the national level, not at the global level. Now I'm talking about at the national level, because this is community by community, population by population. This kind of work can only be done by people who have earned the trust of others. And the fact that Rotary has been not only committed for a long time to good works, but has done so in a way that's manifestly nonpartisan. In the way it's done that, I think it gives it the ability to play a role in this that's not easily substituted for.
Yeah, and Quanta, something I would add, I think your question is quite brilliant, and I think that's one of the opportunities in this relationship is monitoring and evaluation is a relatively new in the scheme of things undertaking in the peace building field, and the relationship with Carter actually I think provides a credible objective opportunity to put monitoring and evaluation mechanisms in place that evaluate any given project, allow greater learnings to take place, and, you know, also learn where things don't work as well as they could. So it's a unique opportunity to have access to that sort of practice, so to speak.
We have two questions, Byron Bland, and then I'll go to Michael Hayes. Byron?
You're on mute, Byron.
Thank you. Mine was more a comment. Patricia, I didn't fail to acknowledge you or recognize you earlier, but nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
I ran, Larry, an exchange between the Stanford Center on International Conflict and Negotiation and the Community Dialogue in Northern Ireland. That ended. The last meeting we had was this morning.
Yep.
And, about 20 years of that. And so I just want to let people know this is really hard work to do. And it is really an impressive presentation and scale that you put together about this. I mean, it's really hard. I know how hard it is to not only get people on the ground to buy into that kind of collaboration, but then also finding academics who can buy into that kind of collaboration. Yes. It's not always an easy thing to find those. And how you create and cultivate that culture is really important. And you've just done a magnificent job. And I basically don't have a question. I just wanted to.
Well, that's a big compliment to you, and I thank you for it.
Yeah.
Michael, then Francis.
Sure. My question is easy and complicated at the same time. So, you're trying to develop a program that has a modality that can be transferred from place to place, and you have a number of entities that are involved.
Oh, we just lost your audio.
Yeah, you have a number of entities that are involved, the Carter School, all the way down to local clubs.
Yes.
Building peace projects that help build community and manage the efforts of the community. How does that process work? You know, because you don't want to end up doing a project that's essentially giving a fish a bicycle, but you also don't want these other entities to interfere too much, but you want to be involved. So how do you manage it at the local level, have the oversight, develop the intermodality? I mean, it sounds awfully complicated.
Well, you know, the truth is, I think it is pretty complicated. And every one of these projects is going to have a somewhat different answer to that. My own thinking is that over the first year or two, we ought to be really introspective about how that plays out. And the modalities we're looking at is not only modalities of peace building, but modalities of working on peace building. And so to try to figure out, for example, on this Lebanon project, if I'm completely candid with you, Patricia's progresses pretty far before the Carter School ever came into the conversation. It's an important piece of trying to scale it. But if, let's say, the Carter School came in and all of a sudden they wanted to reinvent the whole thing, if I were Patricia, I'd say thank you, but no thank you. So trying to figure out a management structure for that undertaking that really takes advantage of the value add, but doesn't do so in a way that dissipates the energy and the talent that's already been accumulated, has got one solution there. When we talked about Cyprus, just as another one, it's a completely different state of development, and the cast of characters are quite different. You can imagine in that one, it beginning with a convening at the Carter School of Greek and Turkish Cypriot individuals on this. And that probably is the form it's going to take. Well, in that configuration, I would imagine the Carter School would take a fairly prominent role in shaping the curriculum for that and actually figuring out how to use that to best advantage. They've done a lot of that kind of work, and the Rotary Network would help identify the individuals and make sure that the ground was laid for that. So I don't think there's going to be a kind of a cookie cutter answer to that. There may even be some, and some of you are better equipped than I to speak to this. There may even be some that start at the Rotary International level. That would not be my favorite place to start. I would rather see things that start with real member-led enthusiasm rather than something that comes down from on top. But you can imagine something at some point that came the other way. That would have yet another kind of a structure to it. So the first thing that we focused on, and I'm pretty sure we're right about this, is if there's no backbone for the partnership, there's no one to even work out these problems. So the first $250,000 went to setting up this capacity to manage the partnership. Then Al Jubitz was nice enough to contribute another 100,000. So that 250 became 350. And we've raised a little more. So say it's 400 now for that entity, that unit. Now that's not the projects. That's the capacity to stand up projects and to support projects. It still leaves unanswered the funding of the individual projects, each one of which is going to have to be the subject of some kind of resource accumulation process. So I'm giving you a very long answer to a very straightforward question, but I think it's going to, if you asked us this question a year from now, I think we'd have a lot more examples to put on the table than we have now. It's all kind of hypotheses now, or in my case, I'm extrapolating from other things I've done that are in some ways analogous to this, but I don't think we're going to know till we know.
Good
Next
luck.
questions are coming in, Larry. So I want to go to Francis, then Michelina, and then Tom. We may have to cut it, but I hope not. Francis?
Thank you. I put one question in the chat, but I actually have a different question now. So because my thinking is evolving with you. And it has to do with your recognizing the need to incorporate the theory of change explicitly into your training. At the parallel with that, we know that in learning and in the theory of change, as you get to the point of actually making a change, and you know it's the right thing, and you've thought about it and talked about it, there is resistance. People say, well, no, I don't think it's the right time. Do we really have enough money? Is it sustainable? Is it political? All that kind of thing. And then there's actually a setback for a moment, and then it surges forward as the change is adopted. My question really is, will you build that explicitly into the training so people understand that going in, that's just a normal cycle?
I can give an unequivocal yes to that.
Okay. In Rotary, we tell this uniform success like this thing arrives complete.
Yeah.
It's just not true.
No, there's no
we
chance.
all know that, but we need to tell the story and celebrate how you solve the problems, how you reconfigure relationships to get through that. And
absolutely correct.
You solidified the trust.
Thank you.
And thanks for tonight. This was very fun.
Let's go to Michelina. And I think she'll hopefully ask the question I was going to ask. Go ahead, Michelina.
My question was asked by Michael, one of it, but then I have a shorter one. I remember like Patricia mentioned something to do with age group. 35 years old.
Oh,
yeah. I was just wondering what's the rationale behind that. And this seems like a great kind of project, but also very complex at the same time. So thank you for undertaking that.
And it's South Sudan out of the question.
What was that, Jim?
Is South Sudan off the table at this point?
Oh, okay. So you want me to take both of them, Larry, and then please add on?
Yeah.
Okay. So the 25 to 35 reasoning was the median age in Lebanon is 29. In contrast, the median age, for instance, in the United States is pushing 40. So there is a large body of young professionals in Lebanon who belong to sects and so on. And so that age range is important for that reason. The second reason is with the university experience that we have, it's fantastic. But if you're in university in Lebanon, you now be aspiring to masters outside, or you might be just beginning your career. So we really wanted to focus in on potential influencers who can really make a difference and who are in positions where they have enough experience or enough authority that if we equip them think as transformational leaders, that makes a difference. And it doesn't mean we're doing the museum. We've been getting some inquiries. Should I go to, wait, I'm gonna go to no video. How's that? Is that better?
Go audio only.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I just did that. So is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I was making the explanation, the argument of 25 to 35. That doesn't mean we're not continuing to work with university students. And courtesy of Larry, we have a new connection with a network of 60 K through 12 schools in Lebanon. So you can do them all, but for the purpose of really being supported and trained and equipped to do the kinds of projects that are consistent with the Arab Horizons idea, you need that sweet spot of 25 to 35-year-olds. Regarding South Sudan, Larry did a wonderful job of saying not all projects will be the same. So South Sudan is not off the table. We have a lovely conversation going with the Ministry of Peace and the Minister of Peace in South Sudan. And there's a trip in February to actually do discovery over there, taking the Carter School representatives with us. And one of the things that is possible in South Sudan is that the project be very, very specific, focused on a particular problem or topic or issue in South Sudan. But like all things in these high conflict areas, you tackle one thing and you're really looking at a variety of things at the same time. But no, South Sudan's not off the table. And Larry, what would you say to that?
I think that's right. South Sudan, for reasons that are really pretty intriguing, seems to have touched a lot of nerves with a lot of Rotarians in the United States. So we found a surprising number of people who are doing something related to South Sudan. Frankly, I was surprised when I found that out. So that plus the fact that we have a couple of really extremely well-placed people on the South Sudanese side in the peace movement make it a very tempting target, notwithstanding all the challenges of South Sudan. But it certainly is not as put together as the Lebanon project is right now.
We have two more questions. I'd like to wrap it up as close as we can. I hate to go over time, but this is so valuable. Tom Baker?
I just have a quick question. First, a comment. This is another amazing project, Patricia. Kudos to you. Are there any plans to like videotape the project so that the story can be shared wider?
Well, Patricia, you can answer this as from your own point of view. From my point of view, given all the questions that were raised earlier about how do you actually make this come alive within Rotary, communications is going to have to be a big part of this whole thing. And trying to figure out how to use for example, the annual conferences, and how to use the Rotary publications, and how to use video, and how to use groups like your own for these sorts of purposes. I think once again, we could really use some coaching.
Thank you. Richard Denton, you get to close it out.
Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you, Larry and Patricia, for being here and giving this presentation. I'm sorry, two questions is, as you can see just on the screen here, a lot of us are wanting to end war, and we have developed Helen Peacock has developed a 6-hour program course that's available over the internet on doing that. And I'm just wondering, on a larger scale, and you're an expert on this, is this something that could be taken on, well, one, incorporated into the Carter School curriculum, but two, are we also looking at Rotary with a program of scale in looking at peace in general?
Patricia, you want to go first on that?
No, please, Larry, go ahead.
I mean, I don't, I'm embarrassed to say, Richard, that I don't know the specific 6-hour program you all have produced, but I'm going to look at it tomorrow. But what I would say in general is I think that's exactly relevant. You know, I mean, why shouldn't it be? If it's something that Rotarians have targeted as a way that we can contribute meaningfully to peace, and there's something to be done to scale it beyond the current level, I think it should be a candidate along with others for figuring out where to focus efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, what an evening. And there is so much to digest here. Larry and Patricia, we are so thankful, so immensely thankful for your work in this exciting program in development. But we also are thankful for all you have done and all the benefit you bring in your efforts towards peace. We truly, truly are blessed and thankful. So I want to, next month, we will learn finally how to bring peace by 2030. David Gershon, who has been called the #1 expert on social change, has put together a concrete plan to achieve this goal.
Right.
You'll hear a lot more about his past successes and why he says this in the information I will be forwarding soon. He's the author of 12 books, and you'll read much more about him soon. Larry, Patricia, we are so grateful. We thank you very, very much.